We're live.
We're live. Okay, you can start, Councillor Hinchcliffe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody to this meeting of the Combined Authority. We have, first of all, a few apologies for absence. Councillor Blake, unfortunately, is unable to join us this morning, but she is substituted by Councillor James Lewis, for which welcome, Councillor Lewis. Also, Councillor Aspin from York is also absent, but is going to be substituted by Councillor de Gorn, who also additionally has given apologies for lateness at this meeting, so will be joining us shortly. Has anybody got any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? Please speak now or forever hold your peace. No, that's good. But do you obviously declare through the meeting if there's anything that occurs to you? Exclusion of the press and public. I'm not sure we have anything today that requires the exclusion of the press and public, Ruth, do we?
No, we haven't.
Lovely, thank you very much. Minutes of the meeting of the Combined Authority held on 27th of November. Those have been circulated. Does anybody have any questions or comments or changes they wish to make to those? No. In that case, can I recommend those as a correct record of that meeting? Who's going to second that? Councillor Swift?
Seconded, yeah.
And all those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. My screen froze a bit there, but I'm gathering you're all going to put your hands up for that, so thank you very much. Yeah. And so that is carried. So we now go on to our COVID update. And obviously we've had a very serious year when COVID has transformed all our lives, and not for the better, I'm afraid. Of course, across West Yorkshire, people have lost their lives. I know the total at the moment from Bradford is 772 people have died in Bradford. That is a huge amount of people who at the end of this year will be looking back on a year that has changed their lives and has taken a loved one away from them. And our condolences are with all those people, both obviously in Bradford, but also across West Yorkshire. It's been a devastating year for many families. The impacts of COVID obviously has been felt much on the health of our West Yorkshire in terms of people who are recovering, but some people it's taken a long time for them to recover. But also it is being felt very much by our economy. And of course, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority essentially is an economic partnership of local authorities across the region, and that's where our focus of our discussion will be today. Is it Ben? Do you want to start with this, or are you going to be going to Ian, who I believe is also drafted this paper?
Well, Chair, thank you. I mean, the last Combined Authority was only on the 27th of November, so we will give a proportionate input update in the light of that. I think I'm going to turn to Brian to take us through the paper.
Brian Archer.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Just to echo what you were saying, Chair, in regards to some of the health impacts. I mean, sadly, across the West Yorkshire region, 2,971 people have lost their lives to COVID, and obviously our thoughts go out to them at this difficult time. Brighter news this week was that the vaccinations have started, and also the effect of the measures is starting to show some positive results. As of the 2nd of December, the West Yorkshire COVID rate was 187 cases per 100,000. Now that's an absolute fall of 61 cases per 100,000 compared to the week before, so brighter news. Within West Yorkshire, Calderdale has the highest rates, which are still falling at 220 per 100,000, and Leeds has got the lowest infection rate at 152 cases per 100,000. So Calderdale, Bradford, Kirklees still have some of the highest rates in Yorkshire and Humberside, along with Hull, Doncaster and Rotherham. So obviously there's no room for complacency. Although overall, across West Yorkshire, the rates are continuing to fall. Although notably, there was a period of deceleration in the last weekend of November. And that's a trend that's been replicated in the other northern MCA areas. Within the UK, the rates have fallen across most areas, particularly in the north and the Midlands, but cases are rising in the southeast and in London. So obviously, we do need to be vigilant and stay on top of the health trends. With regards to the restrictions and the economy, the review of tiers will take place on or before the 16th of December. And it's theoretically possible for to have individual authorities in different tiers at different times, which will present some challenges, particularly to businesses working across different local authority areas. The current regulations will expire on the 2nd of February, and the government are to publish some more information on how areas can move between tiers. Obviously, as colleagues know, we're in tier 3, which restricts meeting indoors and outdoor socialising, unless it's groups of less than 6, with the exception being Christmas, when up to 3 households can get together between the 23rd and the 27th of December. Moving to the economy and business support, it was disappointing in the spending review that there was no additional business support measures announced to those that have already been announced for those areas in tier 3. Obviously, there's been an extension of the job retention scheme, and the local restrictions support grants are still in place. The closed grant, which is £3,000 a month, which is based on rateable value, and then for those businesses in the hospitality and hotel sector, there's the local restriction support grant, which is £2,100 a month, again based on rateable value. Members will be aware we've seen unprecedented demand for the grant support across our region. Over £500 million worth of grants have been dispersed to 40,000 businesses. And last week, with the additional announcements, we saw a big spike in applications. Just to give you some idea of the detail breakdown, Bradford had 3,000 applications, Calderdale had 1,300, Kirklees 2,015 applications, Leeds 3,900 applications, and Wakefield 2,200. So the demand for grant support has been, unprecedented, and credit to the teams in the local authorities and in the LEP and combined authority for managing such a huge volume of inquiries. We've seen over 6,000 businesses supported as well through the advisory service. I was on a call earlier this week with the banks and the British Business Bank. Over £65 billion has been deployed in business support loans. £42 billion worth of that was bounce back loans, and £18.4 billion in coronavirus business interruption loans, with the balance in equity. There was a bright spot in the spending review with regards to the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund, where £100 million has been allocated to a second round for the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund, which will obviously help our region. Some sectors are doing particularly well. Healthcare, food and logistics are doing particularly well, but as we're all aware, the retail sector is struggling. Retail footfall is down 25%. We're looking at 235,000 jobs at colleagues will be aware of the recent announcement with regards to Debenhams, which would account for something like 12,000 of those jobs. So the retail sector is really struggling. Although the banks were saying that the housing market has improved, obviously with the stamp duty holiday, that's seen an increase in house prices, and there is hope that consumer confidence will return and we'll see more spending in the shops to support our beleaguered retail sector. On skills, obviously the government announced the level 3 entitlement, which is fully funded training at level 3 for adults over 24. Yesterday they announced the list of 400 courses that are available for adults to retrain. So obviously we'll be doing what we can to promote those training programs and maximise the take-up. We touched on inward investment at an earlier meeting, and as I say, we've seen some really positive inquiries with regards to foreign direct investment into the region. And that accounts for potentially up to 3,500 jobs, but clearly looking at the unemployment statistics and the economic forecasts, that's still not going to be enough to get us where we need to be. And obviously further on the agenda, we've got Brexit to discuss, which, you know, if you combine that with the COVID double whammy, we're going to have a significant economic impact if there's no deal. I'm happy to take questions.
Before that, can I just move on to Councillor Groves? Just obviously transport is also covered in this with the buses. Councillor Groves, did you want to refer to that at all?
Yeah, obviously a worrying time for transport, and we have saw a significant drop in rail. Rail was around 31%, but just to give you an indication on rail, where that ended up last week, there was a reduction of 82% at Leeds Station, which is huge. The bus on bus, it's gone back up to around 50%. It went down to 31%. And I think our concern is around funding for bus, to make sure that services across West Yorkshire are maintained, and we are asking government to support us with funding that should be devolved to the combined authority. I do also know that operators are having conversations with the government as well. Just to really dig a bit deeper into the uncertainty around funding, we've had to pay concessionary fares over to operators since the beginning of lockdown. And last week, we know the data through our M card, and there was 62% reduction on that card. So we're paying across the funding. And we really need to understand the data of what we're paying for, because it is public money. We are at a stage now that we do need to have certainty so we can plan for the future. I know the money is, the arrangement is in place for April. However, the planning needs to start now. And if operators and the industry are experiencing difficulties, which we know Arriva certainly have said in the news this week, that their industry is facing a difficult situation and some difficult choices, then the reduction of services right across West Yorkshire with the absence of a plan system could have many consequences for service users. We also, the bus is so vital to the economy. Even though the economy is in a really difficult place, the bus, it plays its role, and it also plays its role in getting those frontline workers to our hospitals and to our schools. Long term, it's a concern if the bus industry and if there isn't a plan in place for West Yorkshire, because it's not only vital for the economy, we have to meet our zero carbon challenges. And actually the bus is part of our plans. We think the government may announce some funding at because the national bus strategy should be announced in January, February, but that will be too late. We'll be already, only 4 weeks away from April. And if routes are handed back, if services are cut, then the politicians will be the people facing the questions from service users. We have put a proposition to the government. I know that the government are looking at partnership models for this 2-year recovery period for COVID. We have put forward, working with our operators, a proposition around enhanced partnership working. But I can't stress enough how important it is for us to get a settlement with government so that we can plan for the bus network. And just today, obviously it comes into the budgets, but collectively asking for you are all in leadership roles for your support.
Groves. Dave Pearson, obviously you lead on transport as an officer for the Combined Authority. There was 300 million announced, you were saying earlier, I think, from the budget, but that's not going to be enough to cover the whole country, is it? That is concerning. And what more can we do to lobby, I suppose? Perhaps that's not really a question for you, Dave, but a question for Councillor Groves again, really.
Yes, I think just to clarify, the the spending review identified £300 million in the next financial year for bus, and the COVID recovery period will be the priority for that. Clearly, is that enough money? The issue is that the gap between the fares revenue and the cost of providing the service. Hopefully, as patronage recovers, that gap gets smaller. But we are doing some work locally just to understand what that gap is, so that we're well informed when that announcement comes, as Councillor Grove says, early in the new year. But there is a lot of uncertainty around the budget position in terms of bus, and there is a risk that if that gap cannot be met by the additional funding, then the consequences for the bus network are serious. So we will obviously work with officials at government in terms of trying to get the better clarity of that between now and the next meeting, and clearly any raising of the profile of this issue would be sort of supportive to the Combined Authority's position.
Thank you, Dave. So I'll open it to questions and comments, but Councillor Groves, perhaps we just think, I'll bring you in later, just think about what else we can do to lobby. I think it would be helpful, because obviously it does affect so many people across the region. So any more questions, comments on the report? Roger Marsh.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. Just a couple of comments. On the Northern Powers Investment Fund, I think it's useful that that fund has been increased by 25%, albeit for the whole of the North, and it's a gap fund. It's not in replacement from traditional sources of finance for SMEs. I think the important point is that having contributed, as we did as a city region, into the creation of that pot, that which we contributed, we've had out by more than 2.3 times so far. So it's a useful opportunity for our SMEs. Secondly, and pleasingly, Chair, I was delighted to note in para 2.9, following our discussion at the last Combined Authority about, on the one hand, creating greater skilled retraining and otherwise our communities, the balance side of the supply side, the balance to that is the demand side of having sufficient firepower to not only achieve those inward investment opportunities that Brian talked about, but to continue to progress, as I mentioned in the Combined Authority meeting last, that we are in a position which we haven't seen for the last 5 or 6 years, despite COVID and all the rest of it, in terms of the attractiveness we appear to have for significant inward investment opportunities, particularly where we've now becoming the preferred UK location rather than just substitution or redistribution within the UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And obviously the team, inward investment team, is doing a great job there, showing off what a great region this is to invest in, regardless of what the economic climate is. And we've still got a way to go, haven't we, to make sure that our economy makes the most of that. Any more questions or comments? Councillor Paulson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, just for some clarification. The grants, the business support grants that were being managed sort of by WYCA and the LEP, are there any of those still currently open for new businesses to apply for? I know some of them, like the technology one, were quite oversubscribed. And are we using the opportunity for where we're getting a lot of demand from businesses for specific types of funding, that can be looked at in a wider picture of further funding going forward from WYCA with budgets, etc.? And the second is, do WYCA feed into the discussions over COVID tiers, etc., like the local authorities, or is that left purely to local authorities, or do you get a say in that as WYCA? Thank you.
Just answering your second question first before I go to Brian. So the tiering now is decided by national government. They're not having the same kind of negotiation, in inverted commas, that they had before. So it will be government who makes the decision, and actually we all try and work together at a local authority level now across WYCA to make sure we can manage things uniformly across the region. So we are working quite closely together, but essentially which tier we're in is very much down to government in the future. They've made that quite clear. Brian, would you like to Answer Councillor Paulson's first question, please. Thank you.
Yeah, just in terms of the grant scheme, the grant schemes are still open. The digital voucher scheme has now been fully committed. I think we were 5 times oversubscribed. So obviously, one of the things we'll need to do is look for some additional resource to continue to support that activity. But for the moment, we'd encourage all businesses to contact us to see what the current availability is, because new funding streams may emerge. Obviously, in the spending review, there was a discussion around the UK shared prosperity funding and 220, I think it's 220 million for a year 1 pilots. So there might be an opportunity for us to leverage some more additional funding support through that particular route, as well as single investment funding. So we'd still encourage businesses to apply to us for funding support.
Thank you. And any particular queries you're getting through, just going on Councillor Paulson's point about sectors or issues where it's maybe oversubscribed and maybe an unmet need? And I'll go to Roger then.
I was going to just for Councillor Paulson's benefit and others, part of our success in the Getting Building Fund submission was a further 7 million to augment our business growth programme through 21-22. So there is still funding available for support for businesses to grow and hopefully then employ even more people than they have hitherto.
And we're seeing strong demand from the manufacturing sector, particularly for capital grants, particularly food and drink, and also from some technology businesses, substantial technology businesses. They seem to be, the main where the main demand's coming from at the moment. Food and drink, manufacturing, and cyber security and technology.
And obviously, we need to maintain flexibility enough to be able to respond to those demands when they come through, don't we? I think it's quite interesting, and get as much support for those businesses as possible. So we need them. Any more questions or comments? In that case, I'll go to Councillor Groves. Just on the buses, Councillor Groves, is there anything you think we should be doing as a collective combined authority to do more to raise this issue with governments and to make sure that they heed our concerns, because they are going to impact everyday people who are going about their everyday work and lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's in the public domain that Andrew Gilligan, who obviously advises Boris Johnson, is supporting the bus and active travel. And obviously we could write to grant chaps, but if we could collectively, if the leaders would collectively write across West Yorkshire and be willing to sign a letter to Andrew Gilligan, grant chaps and Boris Johnson, that would be really helpful. And if we could all get a letter circulated that could be sent to all members of Parliament through all the leaders, again, that would be really helpful. I'll continue to share any updates and make sure that members are kept up to date on the enhanced partnership developments.
Thank you. So if I can suggest that you draft something, and then obviously it's up to members whether they sign or not, but obviously I think all our residents rely on our bus services. So I think just from conversations, I think you'd find a willing partners in all of us then to try and get something over the line for our residents' sake.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, the report is for noting, but obviously it's a regular report is COVID, because obviously it's impacting so much on all our lives in terms of residents, but also businesses. So we'll move on now then to, there's no decision required on that paper, but there is decision required on the following papers, starting with the Investment Committee. And the Investment Committee's capital approvals, and Councillor Jeffrey is the chair of that committee. Councillor Jeffrey, would you like to start this item off for us?
Yes, thank you, Chair. To give approval to the progression and funding of the Combined Authority, schemes are recommended by the Investment Committee, as the Chair has said. The report provides details of 2 schemes considered by the Investment Committee in December and recommends to the Combined Authority progression of those schemes, approval of funding, and in some cases approval of changes to schemes. I have received a note earlier, about a quarter of an hour ago, about the Mythen Road Flood Resilience Scheme to vary the agreement with, and the proposal is to vary or enter into a new agreement with at the Combined Authority today. The report maps out each of the schemes onto the insurance process and details as to where it moves forward, but the schemes are set out in the table below and are seeking decision point approval from the Combined Authority. In summary, there are 2 schemes to a total value of 50.530 million, which will require 30 million of Combined Authority funding when fully approved. Full approval of 3.259 million is sought as part of this report for the development of the scheme. I know Melanie can take us through any of the schemes if anyone wants any details on it. But if we could note the amendment on the Mythen Road flood scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. And certainly this is great to be able to get on with these capital schemes, which not only help those communities where they're done, but also helps the local economy in moving things forward and helping sustain our economy. Has anyone got any questions or comments on specific schemes? Councillor Lee. Councillor Lee, we can't hear you.
Apologise. Thank you, Chair. Just a question about the Mythen Road amendment. Could we just be reminded of the basics of that? I trust it's more funding for the Mythen Road project rather than less. So could we have some clarification on that, please?
Melanie, would you like to clarify? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have previously supported a flood resilience scheme at Mythen Road, and we still have some funding available within our flood alleviation programme. And the Mythen Road scheme has expanded significantly following the most recent flooding that occurred in the area. So there is an addition to the scheme that there is an opportunity for us to part fund that, and also to save and safeguard a number of additional businesses compared with the original scheme. So it's a great opportunity for an expanded scheme with expanded benefits for us to invest in. So in the recommendation, we did say we'd like to vary the existing contract, but I think we may need to vary or even enter into a new contract. So we just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair, for that. Could I just commend to all of the members the Mythen Road scheme? And I know that Tim Swift would agree with this wholeheartedly. The people of Mythen Road have really had some terrible times with floods upon floods, and tremendous efforts have gone into this. It's really invoked a tremendous community spirit in Mythen Road and that part of the valley. And I really commend this additional funding. We've got to get that sorted out. So thank you for that if you're supportive.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I don't know if Councillor Swift wants to come in on that. You were named in dispatches there, Councillor Swift.
No, nothing particularly to add. I think Melanie's summary covered the key points, which is this enables to bring us some additional works which were places proved to be vulnerable in the floods back in February. So it's very good news, and thank you.
So nobody who saw Mythen Road just before COVID, actually, with the floods early this year, can doubt that it needs that kind of level of investment, and indeed more. So let's get going with it, I would suggest.
Thank you, Chair.
Any more questions or comments? No? Well, in that case, Councillor Jeffrey, would you like to recommend approval?
Yes, I would. I commend all the schemes and I recommend approval. They're all very important schemes to each of our areas, and we had a good debate at the meeting about them all, and we're all very supportive of the scheme. So I move the recommendation.
I'm happy to second that. Can I see all those in favour, please show? So you've all frozen again on my screen, so I can't. Are you saying yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. That is carried then in that case. Thank you very much. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is EU exit. And this is obviously a momentous time for the nation. And obviously we've all been watching the news and wondering what's going to happen next. We're having to prepare as well from a combined authority point of view as well as we can, although it's not without its challenges, because obviously we don't know what's going to happen next like the rest of the nation doesn't. But there's a paper in front of you which sort of outlines where we're at and where the thinking of the combined authority is. So do we want to start with Ben?
Chair, thank you. I mean, I'll just say a few words by way of introduction. Ian is on hand to answer any more detailed questions about what the about where we are, but it's the paper's really there as a placeholder to explain where we currently are and to prompt any discussion about the end of the transition period. Obviously, I don't need to say any more about the deal or no deal process. What the paper does in para 2.4 is just map out some of the implications that we expect at the point at which we reach the end of the transition period, regardless, I think, of whether there's a deal or not, and then maps out the current activity, which is primarily around supporting businesses that are currently exporting and meeting the needs of businesses that are seeking additional either financial, legal, or kind of process advice. And the funding that's coming through from government is being used essentially to let contracts to specialists that can provide that advice to businesses. And we're using our network of business growth managers to support their current client base of about 1,500 companies. I think what I would say is that we do what we can, as you said, with the resources that we've got, but the potential of the resources we might need to bring to bear if there is no deal are obviously at this point unknown, and we're going to have to stand ready to act as best we can in that likelihood.
Thank you, Ben. And Ian, it'd be useful to know, perhaps it's a Brian question, common questions that are coming up from businesses, perhaps just to see what anything that we need to think about in terms of products and services, either from combined authority view or local authority view.
So, I mean, I'll let Brian say a bit more in detail, but I think broadly what the feedback we're getting from business membership groups is, as outlined kind of in the early part of the paper, while the deal itself is uncertain at this stage, there's still lots of things that we know that businesses need to prepare for, and the paper outlines those. And it's around those sort of things that the business groups are saying that they're getting most of the questions, quite technical, specific to individual businesses, and that's causing some capacity constraints across the kind of business support system. Which one I'll see if Brian wants to add anything.
No, I think that's absolutely right. A lot of the inquiries are highly technical in nature, with regards to tariffs, cross-border VAT arrangements, requiring quite specialist legal expertise in some cases. So the legal and regulatory questions seem to be, top of the bill in terms of concerns that businesses have got at the moment. A lot of anxiety about a no deal. We're already seeing delays at the ports as a result of COVID. I don't know if you heard on the news this week, Honda had to stop production because containers with parts were being held up, and the turnaround time for containers has been delayed. And obviously, if there is a no deal, it will have a massive impact on supply chain. So we're hearing a lot of businesses concerned about supply chain risk. And just to put it into perspective, I mean, the LSC analysis in terms of the impact of a no deal on the economy showed that there'd be an 8% hit to GDP. And if you contrast that with the 1.7% hit that we're experiencing as a result of COVID, it's quite clear that, you know, the impact of a no deal will be significantly greater adverse impact on the economy than COVID. And particularly small businesses are struggling to get the specialist expertise that they need. Listening to the chambers, certainly their feedback is that they've been inundated with inquiries, and there's not enough specialist advice and resource available to support them. So we're continuing to lobby for some additional resource. We did manage to secure £200,000 from BASE, which obviously is not enough, but that has enabled us to procure some specialist expertise to support businesses address some of the challenges.
Thank you. Councillor Pandora, did you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think having a deal or not a deal, I think that's just part of the beginning. I'm hoping that the deal is made, but I think whatever happens, I think we will need to make whatever comes out work. And I think the argument's been had, and I don't want to talk about the argument that's been had right here. I just want to make some comments in terms of moving forward. To me, there's three key issues that we need to actually sort of think about in terms of how we position ourselves as the city region, and then take our role nationally with the rest of the UK. And the three key issues to me are firstly around the poverty issues and the inequality issues, and the SPF, which is still getting developed in terms of what will happen after the deal done or not done, and an issue on security and productivity and growth and trade. So that's one part of my thinking, Chair. The other bit is around the sectors, the university sectors, the financial institutions. Leeds, along with London, is a major financial sector, and we've got a niche within the EU. And I want to see how that can actually develop into a niche across the world and across the globe. And IT and technology, there's some huge players that are coming out across the globe, and that leads on to my third point, which is basically we've got China, India, and America, huge populations. You know, China, you're talking about billions, and we're a country of 60, 70 million, so we're really a small player. And then you see in emerging economies in Africa, and then in South America. And once they're clubbed together, you know, what role do we have once we come out? You know, so we will actually be a small player. So within the global population, you know, what is it that we need to do to actually develop new relationships? Because okay, we're coming out of Europe, whatever that means, but we need to actually now start to forge links with the rest of the world, because the globe is a very small place, and there's a huge amount of work we need to do. Despite a deal, let's assume that deal is done, there's still a massive amount of work that we need to do, and that's where we as a combined authority, we've already sort of like got some good investment officers that work with other countries across the globe, and we just need to beef that up and start to actually refocus that, because I think there's huge opportunities, you know, and I'm always a glass half full person. So a few comments from myself, Chair, to actually, you know, just start to think about how we reposition ourselves part of the UK economy in terms of moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Pandora. Some good points made there. I think the overall question you're asking really is, what is our trading strategy post-exit, actually? And Roger, would you like to come in on that? What is our trading strategy? What should our focus and be for developing those trading relationships across the globe?
I think firstly, just to scale the opportunity, building on what Councillor Pandora said, that over the last 2 years, the country has entered into 57 different arrangements around the world, which approximate to something around £200 billion of bilateral trade. They may be in places that our businesses and our communities haven't engaged with, and maybe in areas where we have our sectoral strengths. I mean, most notably, which the deal just announced today with Singapore and the fintech arrangement as well. as an area that has the largest financial professional services sector outside of London, that's clearly an opportunity. So I think there's some work to be done, which we discussed earlier, to perhaps align with those opportunities as well as dealing with the downsides of Brexit. And I think, to echo how Councillor Pandor feels, that I feel optimistic, although we've got to be realistic that there's going to be quite a lot of disruption and difficulty in the event of a no deal situation as compared to the challenges of a deal situation. But that's counterbalanced with, as I said, in my view, increased opportunities on the global stage that our region should be best placed, because again, as I've said many times, I'm sorry to prolong my comment, that our economic variety, we are a microcosm of the whole UK, should be actually the key to our economic vitality and that reimagining piece of our recovery strategic thinking. So I think there's some detailed work to think about. So where should we focus our efforts beyond perhaps China, India, into other bits of the Pacific and Southeast Asia, South America, etc. Work to be done though, Chair.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anybody else in. Oh yes, I am. Councillor Paulson.
Yeah, just coming up back on the back of what Brian mentioned earlier about the ports and the issues with ports. Clearly, we're not. We don't have a port within any of our council areas, but I would guess a lot of our goods and supplies do come through Hull. Are we having ongoing discussions with the Port of Hull about any impact, not just obviously on the Brexit, but on the back of COVID and Christmas in effect? Because I would guess that majority of our goods that we need for manufacturers or for retail, etc., will come through Hull to West Yorkshire. So are we having proactive conversations with the Port Authority there?
I'll bring in Ian on that, I think probably. I've got something to add as well from national conversations I had yesterday about ports, but Ian, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say I'm not aware that we've had recent conversations, though. Councillor Groves and myself had a previous conversation when we were last close to a major threshold in the EU exit process. I think this situation is quite complex in terms of where things come from in terms of ports. I think you're probably right in terms of manufacturing. Hull is the biggest. Is something we should particularly look at. I think we'll take that away. I think in terms of supplies into retail, it's a much more complex situation that we probably don't have a particular route into, in that much still comes through Dover and other ports.
So I was having conversations nationally yesterday about local authorities around ports, and I'm not sure they've been as included as they might have been by government in the planning for how that's going to work in terms of what kind of local powers will they have to enable queuing, will they have to give welfare and hospitality support to queuing traffic, all that kind of thing has not really been discussed with local authorities around ports. But I think if Councillor Paulson's prompt there, I think we definitely need to speak to Hull and just renew the conversation to make sure we're on top of what they're asking for and support them, of course, because as Councillor Paulson says, it affects us all if they struggle. It is very difficult planning for these things, though, isn't it? Because we don't know, and we're all speculating at the moment, aren't we? And the unknown is difficult to plan for. So, Councillor Lee, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to endorse what was said earlier by who said it? Roger, of course, it was Roger. That it is difficult. It's pleasing to note that we've been taking positive action by getting together our organisations such as the Chamber of Commerce and the DIT and the Combined Authority to try to be in a position to deal with whatever the outcome of these present negotiations are. And of course, as you've just said, Chair, the support which will be needed is absolutely different according to whether we get the deal or not. But I do know that those organisations we're talking to really do have the finger on the button with regard to knowing what's happened at grassroots level. And I share some optimism about whatever the results of the negotiations presently. I think that we will make the very best of it, and businesses are always wanting to do business with one another, whichever country they're in, whether they're in the EU or in the UK now. They still want to carry on doing business, and they're a very resilient group of people. So I think that they'll find a way, and with support from our local organisations that are having discussions about this, can only be a good thing. And whatever happens, I think there are great opportunities from January the 1st for us to go out and take advantage of. Thank you, Chair.
And just to let people know, each of the local authorities has a Brexit plan, and also I believe there's had to be a plan discussed at LRF level as well, Local Resilience Forum level, in terms of just going back to how we manage whatever comes next. So let's just bear that in mind as well. Councillor Galton, did you want to come in?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I apologise for interrupting this wave of optimism which has swept the board on Brexit. My glass is usually also half full, but at the moment it looks like it's half full of sick, because the apprehension of not knowing what's going on is very significant. I noticed that in the report that we've got here is quite thin. And when I've seen other reports, particularly from a colleague that passed one from Kirklees, it did actually indicate what the extra costs would be to businesses, dependent upon where their current markets were for export and import. And I think that kind of clarity is quite useful for us if we're going to be working on a West Yorkshire context, to understand what that true risk is to our economy. Secondly, Councillor Pandor mentioned having, I think he was on about diplomatic emissaries in the EU or whatever. I think it would be quite useful to have a conversation in the spirit of devolution for us to be talking to the Foreign Office to ensure that all of our embassies, who will be playing an even greater role in the future to try and generate trade, which needs to have a lot more enablement, would specifically have offices for the different regions. And I think that's something that you could take forward, Councillor Hinchcliffe, as leader of this board, to get that kind of commitment. And then lastly, on the ports issue, our local MP has put forward at the last debate in the House of Commons, sorry, not the House of Commons, it was a Westminster Hall debate about northern infrastructure, the possibility of a brand new freight line going trans-Pennine with something in the middle which was going to be a free port. And I wondered if any conversations had actually happened with anybody who would be in a position to actually make a decision on that locally in the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, because I thought that would have to be a pretty significant commitment to make, especially around the investment needed in terms of that infrastructural element for freight. And is that something which is being actively looked into? I find that very interesting, because it looks like the free ports are the only option that the current government has in terms of enabling growth in the face of increased tariffs. So if anybody could answer that one, I'd be very grateful. Thanks, Chair.
Ben, there is a process for free ports. I'm seeing Brian waving at me as well, but Ben, do you want to talk about free ports?
I can do, Chair, yes. I mean, as you said, there is an active process at the moment. The West Yorkshire as a combined authority has not submitted a bid to be a free port, but is working and engaging with other places that are. I suspect that in terms of the points that Councillor Galton has raised, I mean, very briefly, yes, we'll happily liaise with other authorities on to get information about business costs. It's obviously could go into a lot of detail, and the papers here were designed to provide an overview. On the issue of a new freight line across the Transpennine, the Transport for the North proposals aren't just focused on passenger transport, although that's where lots of the attention goes. There are options in there for freight routes. So I guess there is an element of synergy between looking at long-term infrastructure for freight and the location of free ports, but that's not a conversation that at least I'm aware of, although my colleagues might have been in more detailed conversations where it has been raised.
Okay, thank you very much. So any more questions or comments? No? Okay, in that case, just sort of summing up really from where we got to in that conversation. So first of all, I think there was a general urge to the Prime Minister to please get a deal because we need some clarity and some, it's all right as coming up with numbers about what impacts might be, but if we don't know, we don't know, do we? So some clarity going forward would be really helpful. I think also some resource for business support is what I heard Brian asking for earlier. I think we need to keep pushing to get some of that. A trading strategy, which going back to Roger's point, I think it would be useful actually for perhaps one of our informal meetings to discuss what a trading strategy might look like, a global trading strategy post-Brexit. Obviously, if we're going to have some movements at the beginning of next year after the end of this month, then that will be a very good time to talk about that. So perhaps if we can do that. And I think we also need to bring back this item probably to the next meeting, which I believe is in February. Is that correct? If we can do that in February and have that on the agenda so we can discuss more, because there will be inevitably more news in February and there may be more clarification, which will make our conversation more focused. Is everybody okay with that? So sorry, my screen froze again. Sorry, I don't know why this is happening this morning. Did somebody else want to speak? Sorry, I missed that if they did. Just seen a note from Ian.
Oh, sorry, Chairman. It was just to come back on Councillor Galton's point about the quantifiable cost to business. The LSC analysis that I alluded to earlier came up with a figure of 160 billion or £2,400 per capita. I can provide further details outside the meeting. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I miss anybody else before I move to close this item? Speak if I did. I'm not seeing anybody else indicating.
I just wanted to ask a question around inland ports, if they can be free ports if they're designated near an enterprise zone.
Ian might be best placed to give a quick view on that.
So I do. I mean, I just expand a little bit on what Ben said. So yes, I think in summary they can. Our view at this stage is that what the government's indicating as the number that they're looking to grant, that an inland port would be fairly a long way down the list. So there's lots of opportunities with some of the obvious prospects in the north, based around ports, seaports and airports, that we think at this stage we would be in a stronger position to support and try and influence, so that they support and don't compete too directly with our regional businesses. And that is the route we're taking at the moment, rather than developing a prospect, either an inland kind of river port, or potentially even a road-based port. Could be something that was in the region, but we feel that would be a kind of a second round of free port identification would be more successful at that stage.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is that it then? Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So with those sort of actions that I outlined there, if people are happy with those, I just move to a recommendation that we note the progress already made on this item, but look forward to a further update in February, I'd suggest. Can I just see all those please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. So obviously that is for further discussion as we go forward. And I'm sure we'll have lots more debate to come, but lots more work to do. and we'll see what happens next. So we're moving on now to the spatial priority paper. Now, Councillor Swift was going to introduce this item, but I'm afraid he's had to go on an urgent call. So I'll start this in that it's an important part of our strategic economic framework that we work on, and has been worked on for a few months now by officers for each local authority area. Ben, I know Alan is absent today. Would you like to just say a little bit about this item?
I certainly can, Chair. Thank you. I think, as you've said, the spatial priority areas are an approach that's taken by the authorities across West Yorkshire and the Combined Authority in order to identify those areas of most strategic economic significance, and that provides a framework when we are using this for spatial planning and for bidding intergovernment purposes. The concept was developed some years ago and has been refreshed over recent years with the involvement of local authority planning and economic development officers, and is brought here for the Combined Authority's endorsement. We will then use the framework going forwards.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Roger?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I have first of all, I'm very happy to support this work. We'll come to that in a moment. I guess my question is, how will we ensure, and to what extent does this Combined Authority need to have not so much oversight, but at least an overview of the alignment with the various town fund deal development, which, recognising there's 8 or 9, I can't remember how many there are, but at 25 million a shot, that adds up to quite a lot of money. I'm not suggesting trying to limit those locations, aspirations, but how do we make sure that linking with the Transforming City Fund and any other funds that come, that we optimise the use of that resource, both for those communities, but also the wider West Yorkshire footprint.
It's a good point, Roger. Obviously, it's a valuable money possibly coming to the region, and we need to maximise that with anything we do. Ben, have you got any thoughts on that? Or Melanie?
Well, Ian might want to come in terms of how the town fund work is progressing. I think from an overview perspective, Roger's right. We would look to maximise the opportunities of bringing together funding streams and development work where we can. I don't think that we sought to ensure that each of the town areas was part of the SPAs. I think it's more a kind of looking for opportunities where they naturally exist.
There's no money directly with this, is it? It's just a lead-in to more money is what we're talking about here. But we do also always need to think about how that connects with other strategies to maximise that money. Councillor Pandora, did you want to come in?
Yeah, regarding the town fund, it's interesting, and I think Roger's absolutely right that there needs to be more linkages and more evidence-based. But without getting too political, I think the town fund, there's a lot of political influence that goes within the bidding process, and that's part of the problem. And ideally, it needs to be more linked up and more evidence-based and more sort of like rational and in terms of the wider picture. But that's just something to actually sort of like put into the mix. That it's not as straightforward as we'd like. Thanks.
There's an MP on every one of these boards, of course, and that can be helpful and sometimes not helpful. So obviously we need to make sure it's connected in very much to what we're doing at West Yorkshire level. So we can make sure we get as much money into those towns as possible, because our towns have really suffered over the years. Everybody needs to feel the benefit of economic success, and we're going into a very difficult period, and therefore every penny is going to count. So we need to make it count. Any more questions? Or Councillor Galton, were you just waving or scratching your ear, or were you want to come back in again?
It's a quick one though, Chair. I noticed that there's a good spread of these growth zones across our patch. But one of the things in a parochial sense I did notice was that my particular community doesn't have any, but I am surrounded by other peoples, and those growth zones are going to have effects on those communities which are adjacent to them. But because there's also boundary issues as well, in terms of some zones are put forward by Wakefield Authority or Kirklees or Calderdale. How does WYCA intend to involve wider elected member consultation on these proposals?
I suppose the question is as well, how wide are the boundaries around these centres, aren't they? Is everybody in West Yorkshire covered by one of these centres, would be the question as well. Ben?
Should I come back on that? So the answer is no. These areas don't cover the whole of West Yorkshire. If you put them all together, they're intended. I think as we set out in paragraph 2.6 of the paper, they're intended to represent the areas of greatest opportunity. They're not hard boundaries. So this is about identifying those places where we might stand better chance of securing resources from government. And are better able to kind of join up, as Roger raised earlier, different funding pots and different opportunities. They don't have any statutory status. This is much more about helping us join up at a city region level, and the economy doesn't respect administrative boundaries. So we would expect that communities would benefit from investment that can be levered into these areas, even if they're not within the boundary.
Yes, but that's once again having your glass half full, because every development has consequences, and that's why we have planning control. So for every community that might benefit from jobs, they might also be blighted by huge juggernauts going through the centre of them. So that's why I'm saying a little bit of coordination and planning would be useful. And in terms of that relationship with emerging policy from government in terms of its predilection to target directly from the centre to individual communities, like through the Towns Fund, and now they've got the Levelling Up Fund. Their criteria could be influenced by the spatial priorities that we're setting out here. So in terms of that wider geography to enable, it might be worth emphasising which communities are going to benefit from these economic spatial priority zones, so that they don't get precluded from accessing some of this other money which is being promoted by
thank you, Councillor Golden. So I think we have to be really clear that this is not a funding. This is not a funding. This is
no, but the government might set its
Golden,
criteria for funding.
I'm chairing this meeting, Councillor
Golden.
You're coming in. Wait a minute. So I think we need to make sure that the benefits of economic activity are felt evenly across the whole region, and I think we as leaders have always been very clear about that. So whether obviously we all move around the region all the time, of course, as well. If there's employment created in Leeds, we have to make sure that each and every person in the region has the opportunity to get to Leeds and back. Similar with Bradford, Huddersfield, wherever. So I think it's an inclusive growth question, actually, Councillor Galton, that you're asking. And I think that's something, obviously, Councillor Pandore's leading on proactively for the region. But that is a wider question that can't be solved just by this document, which is not actually funding related. I mean, Roger, you wanted to say about this is a strategic document, not a tactical document. Is that what you're referring to in your comment there?
I think more the approach to investment, which is to the root of Councillor Galton's concerns and all our concerns, that the thing becomes. Let me just pick at random a place with a Towns Fund, Morley, or a place Dewsbury. Actually, the thinking around that community is one thing, but actually how as a piece of a wider West Yorkshire jigsaw puzzle for economic and inclusive growth, it works in tune with that, rather than perhaps in a competitive way that's actually disadvantaging the wider region and may not be actually advantaging that particular community. That's where I was trying to come from, Chair.
Thank you very much. Yes, so this is a strategic document. that is helpful, but does not provide all the answers to everything we need to happen across the whole region. And we do have layered strategies, don't we, in terms of transport, housing, employment, about how all that fits to benefit the widest number of people. And all that should be shot through with inclusive growth ambition that we've all got. Because otherwise we're not going to work as a region if that doesn't happen. So Ben, anything else you'd like to add on this item before we move to the conclude it?
No, I don't think so, Chair. I think yourself and Roger have picked up the point I was going to make.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that then, this has come through the place panel, I believe. So Tim obviously not able to join us for this item, but in his absence, I'm happy to recommend that. Can I see all those? Who's going to second that? Councillor Pandora, would you like to second that? Thank you. All those in favour, please show. I think that's carried. All those people are freezing again on my phone. Is that? Are we okay with that, everybody? Ruth, is that okay? Ruth, I can't hear you.
I can't see everybody's hand at the moment. If they'd like to just put them up again if you want.
All right, thank you very much.
I've got yourself, Councillor Pandora and Roger. Is Councillor Lewis there? Yeah.
Yeah.
But not right. Okay, but not Councillor Galton or Councillor Polson or.
Right, okay.
Can't see Councillor Lee now. No, right. But it is carried. You've got your majority there.
Thank you very much. That is carried. Thank you very much. So next on the agenda is
Connectivity plan, Chair.
Thank you. Connectivity plan. So this is something that I believe Councillor Groves have been working on quite assiduously. Am I right with that, Councillor Groves?
I hope so, because I spent 18 months.
Just checking.
I know, I'm bracing myself for the half glass full, but here we go, let's go. The Connectivity Infrastructure Plan sets out a long-term transport infrastructure investment programme for the next 20 years and provides a spatial picture of where improvements are most needed to stimulate inward investment and improve, most importantly, people's quality of life. For West Yorkshire's economy to flourish and communities to thrive, we need a transformation in our transport system. Even in these challenging times, it's crucial that we continue to be ambitious and that we have a 21st century system that meets the challenge of the climate emergency. We're bringing this document forward today because we really want the public to be involved and stakeholders at an early stage, helping shape our plan. I've managed to do a whistle-stop tour and managed to brief every leader and portfolio holder across West Yorkshire. And the plan really does focus on the West Yorkshire Transport Strategy up to 2040. It's been evidence-led, and it's the start of a process that works towards a pipeline of transport infrastructure by connecting all our important places and focusing on the most disadvantaged and the peripheral places. So we want to focus on inclusive growth. So it's really important that we've connected into groups and communities, and we want to respond to the climate challenge. But it's been informed by those very local district plans for growth and aspirations. So housing and jobs and that economic geography across West Yorkshire. Obviously, it's focused on three key challenges, which is the COVID recovery, inclusive growth, and climate change. So it's an infrastructure plan for the future that involves all modes of transport, from bus, rail, cycling, walking, and a form of new mass transit that we've not gone into the technologies for. So we want to engage with the public, and we've got a timeline for that would be in mid-January. It's important to recognise the work that's gone into this, and I've noticed Liz has joined us on the call, the enormous amount of work, not of the officers at WYCA, but also the Transport Committee, portfolio holders and districts. It includes the infrastructure plan, as I've said, a mass transit vision, a West Yorkshire rail vision and strategy, West Yorkshire bus network and evidence for change in 10 corridors. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and I'm not sure if Liz or Ben want to speak to the paper.
Thank you.
No, happy to take questions. You've covered it, Councillor Groves.
I mean, we talked about investment into the region and the Towns Fund, but this will be a huge driver of our economic growth in the future if we get it right. We've been very much underserved by public transport for many years now. Really delighted to see the progress we've made on West Yorkshire Mass Transit, which I think is a massive game changer for the region. As all the other elements, it needs to be integrated to all the other elements of transport across the region to make us a success. So any questions or comments on this paper? Roger?
Sorry, just a brief one, Chair, both a request and an offer that, as set out in para 2.16, the engagement, I think as much of the business community as we can, beyond just the representative organisations that we would normally go to, would be helpful, as it's such a massive change to what our framework of our economy will be for decades to come. So that's the request. The offer is to play whatever part Councillor Groves and others might feel I could help to convene the likes of the professional services, the banking community, etc., all of whom have a voice and actually would be important advocates for what we want to do, as well as beneficiaries.
It's a good point, Roger. And Liz, I mean, how comprehensive is our engagement strategy? Notwithstanding, of course, we're in COVID and therefore we can't do events, just the same issues we had when we went out to consultation on the devolution deal. Can you just sort of outline how that's going to work, and perhaps we can take Roger up on his offer to augment that?
Yes, thank you. We'll definitely take you up on your offer. Thank you, Roger. Our comms team are currently writing the plan at the moment, so we are looking at all the different people that we would like to engage across all the different kind of operators and partners, because we're not going to be able to do this by ourselves. So we are starting some of those conversations already with bus and rail, but then obviously the business community and the public. We'd really like to find a way, even through digital channels, to engage as many people as possible in the work. So we do have a consultation plan that we are developing at the moment, which will try to address that and learn some of the lessons that we've experienced over the last so many months working remotely.
Thank you very much. So it'd be good to have a look at that. Councillor Galton, question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My glass is half full on this one. I will say the transport policy stuff is something that has the best engagement model in terms of the combined authorities policy making. Unfortunately, a lot of it is around consulting around strategy rather than consulting around delivery. And I think, being someone who's been scarred by the Supertram and NGT process that has delivered nothing in Leeds for 2 decades throughout being elected, I want to see, I know we've been unable to do some strategic thinking about mass transit. It'd be really good if, out of all of this work which has happened, that we could have some meaningful proposals come forward soon. And maybe if the longer term, in terms of shovels in ground for mass transit, could they perhaps be trialled through differentiated bus routes along the same routes to see if the same benefits could be achieved as a precursor? I think that's the kind of creativity we need to take forward as we review our relationship with the bus companies, given that they were already in a shaky financial position before COVID, and then ever since WYCA has basically acted as a go-between for even further subsidy to private operators which aren't responding really very effectively to local need. And I think that's something that would be really exciting and that people would want to get engaged with, whether it's business or whether it's workers themselves or people who just use the transport to get around and see family. They would buy into that kind of conversation, I think.
Councillor, where have you been? The Transport Committee have been discussing this for ages. Councillor Groves, do you want to talk a little bit about the different technologies? And bus routes, etc. You've been through a lot of this already, haven't you? I think in Transport Committee. Councillor Groves, we can't hear you.
I did obviously take Councillor Galton through all the strategy as a leader of the city. What I would say is we're all scarred by NGT, but so when Manchester and Birmingham and even Nottingham were on this journey, they all had lessons to learn. We've been and visited all those places and we've picked up lessons learned. We've got best practice from them. We've looked at their financial models. We're building a business case to access the 4.2 billion government funding that this unlocks. But more importantly, Councillor Galton, you raised a really good point about how we can. When I was talking you through the strategy, I did say that mass transit would be using all different modes because a tram system or whatever technology we use will take 5 years to build. So there is the opportunity to do mass rapid bus as they have done in Birmingham on certain routes. It will fit certain routes better. The bus model is broken, so we need to look at two types of different bus models, the arterial routes and those that serve communities, the small community buses. So we're working on that. I think on policy, we have to feed, we're obviously doing the decarbonising transport work, zero carbon. So we'll be feeding some policy objectives into the strategy. Like I said it's the start of the process. We have to get this business case absolutely right, and the public's voice is crucial, and business voice is crucial in all of this. But I think one of the things that we do need to work on, and I think we're all working on it already across West Yorkshire, is those behaviour changes of how people travel. And there's a lot of work to be done there on model shift. So I'll leave it there, Chair. I don't know if Liz wants to come in.
Thank you very much. Liz, where's Liz gone? Oh, she's over there. Liz, did you want to say anything further to that?
I think Councillor Groves has covered it. I think the ability to try and engage people not just in the plans, but in how they themselves are going to travel differently in the future, given carbon, I think is going to be really important. So it's really good to see the link between this paper and some of the other papers that I know you're talking about today in terms of carbon, and look forward to linking these two together and helping the public understand some of the challenges we have.
Lovely, thank you very much. So I'm not seeing anybody else indicating. Oh, Councillor Paulson, sorry, renamed you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to thank Councillor Groves for going round and briefing us all on this. It's very much appreciated, and obviously a big commitment on your part, but we do appreciate it. I actually stand back to the days going in the distant past of actually being on Transport Committee for a short period, when I think we sort of started the initial work on this. And I remember, many groups with Liz there, and looking at this going forward. So it is nice to see work does actually eventually come out at the other end. Just really from a public perspective, and I did mention this when Councillor Groves did brief us. We talk about mass transit, on the board and in Transport Committee, etc. But we are concerned, what do the public interpret mass transit meaning? Do they think we're going to have some metro system under West Yorkshire like London has? Do they think it's going to be, buses on rails? I know the consultation doesn't commit to what mass transit is, but I think we do need to be clear to people what we envisage by mass transit, and particularly probably people in Leeds with issues that they've had over the decades with various systems that haven't come to fruition. My other plea is always on transport stuff is feeding in the freight issue, and looking at freight is so key as well when we look at any transport things going forward. And just finally, I know some colleagues were concerned that a lot of the data and facts and figures in this are pre-COVID. So there is a bit of a concern that will people's behaviours just eventually go back to what they were pre-COVID, or is there actually going to be a long-term change in how people do use transport going forward? So maybe we do need to be a little wary about some of the data and stuff that we are going to be consulting on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paulson. I think my own view is that given that we're talking about infrastructure that's going to go in for 10, 20, 30, even and with heavy rail, 100, 150 years, that I think transport will be a major game changer in the future, regardless of what happens in this current year or two. So I think the investment in transport is definitely worth it. It's one of the biggest tools to knock down those inequalities that we all strive to eliminate all the time. Councillor Groves, I mean, there is going to be some money available to bid into at national level, isn't there, to explore some of the questions that members are asking here, and that's what we're preparing for, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have taken Councillor Paulson's points on board, and I think you get involved in transport, and even I speak like I work on the railways now, so we do need to change quite a lot of the language in the document so that, you know, people understand that in terms of freight, I can assure you that it's in our plan. I have already visited Hull Port, and we're going to ask the CEO of Hull Port to come to one of our rail operator forums that we've just started, and we've got somebody from National Freight sitting on the export panel board to give us challenge. So yeah, that will be taken on board. We've taken all your points away, and we're working on that before we go out with the documents.
Thank you, Councillor Groves. But Councillor de Gorn, I believe Councillor Lee's indicating as well.
Yes, I very much welcome this, even though I'm slightly one step removed in the City of York. I think I would hope that we can learn. I know we're a little bit behind yourselves in terms of our devolution position and so on, but I would very much hope that we can learn from your experience of this as we refresh our local transport plan. It's very much in need of bringing that up to date and looking at the situation post-COVID. I was just going to mention, when you talk about mass transit, I have actually, this morning, the reason I was late was for the launch of the Sky Class Cities app, which is starting with very high class sort of quality service. I think Cities app, you know, is an example of good practice where the private sector has sort of created a market in many ways for you know, more attractive public transport options for people. You know, even though it might be competing with rail, it is the sort of thing that people are clearly wanting to have. And post-COVID, something which is clean, sanitized, and got all the Wi-Fi. It's even got a book club on board if you want to read a book on your journey from York to Leeds. So yeah, just want to say that, you know, mass transit can be all different types of things. And I think that point that was made about creating high-class bus routes that could then become transformed to trams or whatever is a good sort of approach to get engaged with the private operators and keep them on board with rather than seeing it as a competition.
Thank you, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I too want to thank Councillor Groves for spending the time with me and Rebecca, as Councillor Paulson, on this. It was extremely useful, and I think we were all in accord that this is so important to our region. As we've heard Roger Marsh say, we are competing in global markets. We want to continue to attract inward investment. We have to have a suitable transport system for now and for the years ahead. And having seen the tremendous effect that the tram in Manchester has had on all of the outlying towns, it's just been remarkable. And we want to emulate that sort of forward thinking, take this forward and make West Yorkshire even better than it is now to connect for business and indeed for all other reasons. So yeah, we're behind this.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments? You're all moving around, so I'm not seeing anybody putting their hand up, so that should be okay then. So in that case, Councillor Groves, did you want to recommend this paper? Because this is now moving to the next stage of engagement, which is crucial, as we've all been talking about. Make sure you engage with the widest number of people possible.
Yeah, the recommendation is that you note the work so far and that we move to the next steps of engagement in January 2021 and continue the work.
That's lovely. Can I therefore agree and second that? So I can see all those in favour, please show. I think, let me just check. Were we carried there, Ruth? Is that okay? Lovely, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. So, so please go and spread the news far and wide with that. It's a really important document for our future, and let's make sure it's people are aware of it, and indeed we deliver on it as quickly as possible and get the money in with that we need to deliver it as well. So, moving on to the next item, excuse me, which is comprehensive spending review. Also, comprehensive spending review was it the week before last? I don't know. Each week goes into the next, doesn't it? Really, at the moment. Obviously, I think from my point of view, the biggest disappointment there was nothing as a down payment for our regional economic recovery plan, and that's the same from all the regions, of course, that I've spoken to. We've all submitted plans that have yet to have feedback on. Although when we had conversations a few weeks ago, we did ask Robert Jenrick, didn't we, for a meeting with Treasury and himself to talk about our regional economic recovery plan. I do want us to push that. Ben, where do you think we're at with the with comprehensive spending review?
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, the paper takes you through the various aspects of the spending review. So I won't repeat any of the detail within the paper, though happy to take questions on it, unless they're difficult, in which case I'll pass them to Ian. But what I would say, I think I would echo your comments about I think the omission around anything around local economic recovery. The other thing of particular interest to the Combined Authority and the Local Enterprise Partnership is that we're still awaiting kind of clear signals about any successor to the growth deal, which ends at the end of next March and is the main funding source through which we provide business support and infrastructure across the piece. I think what we're doing, as you know, and as Roger mentioned earlier on, we're using other funding sources as we can to extend the programmes, because what's most important is that we are able to provide continuity, particularly on business support and on skills. We're seeing that the Levelling Up Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund are kind of what you might call the successor funds that the government is talking about, but the process of accessing those funds appears to be a kind of reversion towards competition, I think, which is disappointing in the context of devolution, and the quantum aren't as great as we've seen over recent years, and the spending review sets out some of the reasons why that might be the case. So, two other points I'd make, Chair, if I may. There were some interesting comments around the revisions to the Green Book process, which offer the potential for allowing schemes outside of the most productive areas of the country to have more traction, and that might be a potentially good thing. And that, secondly, that many of the kind of the detailed decisions and next steps have been pushed forward to the budget, and so, as we discussed earlier, we need to look at what the budget's going to have in store next March.
Thank you very much, Ben. So any comments or questions on the comprehensive spending review, its implications? Councillor Galton.
Just a quick one, Chair. The Green Book comments are pertinent because we were promised a lot more in terms of detail about how they were going to effectively make the rules on funding work more for the North. But one of the issues that's come up is something that specifically wasn't mentioned in the spending review, which might have an impact on us, and that is the fact that £1 billion has been taken out of the rail infrastructure investment fund. And I just wondered if that had an impact on our plans locally.
Do you want me to respond on those points, Chair? So I think on the point about rail, Councillor Galton, there was a meeting yesterday of the body called NTAC, the National Transport Acceleration Council, chaired by Grant Shapps, and he raised that very point and commented that the government don't see it quite in those terms, and that they see it much more that some of the funding that's been attributed to that loss of funding was more about the programming and scheme funding that couldn't be spent in certain time periods. So we're going to have a look at that and see whether it does have any impacts on schemes in our patch. Sorry, I've just momentarily forgotten the first point you raised.
It was the Green Book and the lack of clarity on criteria changing.
Yes, so further details will be coming on that, but the main change to the Green Book is the shift of emphasis away from what you might call the narrowly defined benefit cost ratios and greater acknowledgement of the strategic case.
Roger?
Yeah, could I just add to that, to Ben's remarks there, Councillor Galton, that there is a review process going to be undertaken in the early part of the year. And certainly at the NTAP meeting yesterday, the Secretary of State for Transport expressed surprise or indeed encouragement that at least LEPs and maybe this combined authority should make some submissions to how it should work in practice, because it's fine saying we're going to go out from, as Ben said, a narrowly defined criteria of benefit cost ratio to the wider aspects of enabling growth rather than just managing growth as previously. And I think maybe that's something, certainly the LEP will be making a submission to it, and I'd be happy to share that if it's appropriate, perhaps at one of our future meetings, just to try and help shape how the thing is implemented rather than just to wait for it to be done to us.
Thank you, Roger. So I think I've made it clear as well with ministers that if they want something to happen, they're going to have to put their hand up for it, and therefore there's a political decision to make here as well. They can't just rely on the Green Book to say, oh no, well, I'd love to do it, but the Green Book says no. There's a reason we have politicians in this country, and it's to make difficult decisions, and therefore government should be held to account for those decisions, regardless of what the Green Book says. So with that then, obviously the paper's for noting rather than anything else, but it's useful for us to have a look through and see where we're heading. We need to obviously do more lobbying because we know that the economic challenges to come are huge, and we're going to need a significant government investment to get us into a better place economically. And that's not millions, I'm afraid that is billions, particularly in places like West Yorkshire and indeed the North, which have been hit by local economic restrictions now for the best part of a year. So we're all under no illusion that there's lots more work to do and lobbying to do to government as well. So I said that's for noting. So shall we go on next to the budget paper, which I believe is next, which is going out to consultation. Angela, it's been a tough year for the budget, hasn't it? Because
it has indeed, Chair. I think you've all very helpfully explained in all the preceding items why this year is a really difficult year to set a budget. We're not alone in that. Obviously, it's the same issue for all our local authorities, and there are so many unknowns, it makes this quite challenging. However, we start with our business planning. We continue with the 4 big priorities we've agreed in previous years. Obviously, this year it's going to be, next year's will be overlaid with the impact of the EU exit, COVID, and also our need to step up and deliver our functions and responsibilities as an MCA. So we put a draft summary plan on a page at Appendix 1 in the paper, and we're doing further work on the detail and summary levels for each of our directorates, and we'll bring that back alongside the full budget in February. We have been working on finding ways to reduce our in-year spending, push for further funding from government, try and close our in-year budget gap, and that gap is closing. At the same time, we've got the draft sort of core budget for next year, and again, that not surprisingly also has some funding gaps. You've talked in a number of items of the issues of bus funding and the lack of clarity over the future model, but the continuing position from Department for Transport, where we have to keep paying out at pre-COVID levels as part of the recovery. DfT have issued some further guidance recently about the concession reimbursement. We are looking at whether there is any wriggle room within that to bring down our reimbursement in any way at all. At the moment, and based on all the discussions before, we have assumed that our transport levy will have to stay unchanged in order to meet the not insignificant continuing cost of bus. We will bring the full budget back in February for you. That will have the detailed business plans with them. What's clear at the moment is we're struggling to include any of the additional capacity to meet the requirements of the new mayoral combined authority and things. For example, we have to fund the elections ourselves from our funds next year. So we will continue that work with partners to understand the gaps, see what opportunities we've got, and we'll be coming back in February with hopefully a solution to all of this. We will work through that detail with the budget working group between now and February, and overview and scrutiny have also asked to see the budget in January. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Roger?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Angela. And forgive me, colleagues, as some number of you know my professional background, I can't help myself when I see a spreadsheet of numbers. Appendix 2 in particular, I was interested to note the reduction in, or anticipated reduction in the cost of employees, particularly as we transition to a mayoral CA and increased capacity aspects of delivering on our strategy. So just perhaps you could clarify that for me. And secondly, just for my own information, just open out what miscellaneous other, further down on that spreadsheet, miscellaneous other income is. I know they're detailed points, Chair, but taken together, they either help support the reduction in the net expenditure, or if neither or both weren't achievable, they could potentially double the shortfall we're trying to manage. That's why I've honed in on those two.
Thank you, Roger. Angela, where have you gone?
I'm still here. The miscellaneous income, where it's shown against a particular directorate, is because it is something unique to that directorate. It is something that we are banking on happening. I'll provide further detail. I don't have the full detailed spreadsheet behind it to hand, but I'm happy to share that outside of the meeting. Our employee costs are based on the current establishment. We haven't yet built in that additional capacity for next year. That's one of the points of challenge around how we shape the organisation going forward, and we need to work through that detail with the working group in order to bring it back in February. I think we acknowledge across ourselves and our partners, the mayoral combined authority brings opportunities, it brings new responsibilities, and we know there are gaps, and there is work ongoing across the partnership to understand what those gaps are, how we might best meet those.
Thank you. And obviously this is a beginning of a budget consultation. Are we going to have some of the explanations that we've had in previous years with telling people how the budget works and what the money gets spent on? I think that's really helpful for the understanding of the public to see what the combined authority does and what the money goes on.
Yep, that should be going live this week, and it follows a similar model to previous years, where we set out where the money comes from and where it goes, and helps address the fact that so much of our funding is transport levy, so much of that is directed by a prescribed route of reimbursement, and that money comes from council taxpayers in West Yorkshire. So it's following similar to before. We'll have a little animation that shows where the money gets spent, and seeking to answer any questions from members of the public and encouraging them through the online Your Voice portal to put any views and comments that we can look at them as we put together the budget for February.
Thank you very much. So any more questions or comments? I can't see everybody again, I'm afraid, so do speak if you want to ask a question, because I can't see you all. You're frozen.
Can't see any others.
Okay, thank you very much. So in that case, I'm happy to propose that to go out to consultation. Can I see Councillor Shabir Pandor perhaps second that? So I can see him. All those in favour, please show. Okay. I'm sorry, Ruth, I can't see you either now. This is very frustrating, actually. Are we okay with that? Did you see
You are.
Lovely, thank you very much. So moving on now to, I think it's assurance framework next, isn't it? Which might sound to members of the public, which is something a little bit boring and dull, but it is actually the engine for everything we do, and make sure that the decisions that are made are not decisions based on preference. We prefer one place over another, but they have to go through a uniform framework which fairly and openly judges one project against another and makes sure that it complies with the objectives that we're trying to meet from a strategic point of view as a combined authority, which is growth, and good growth at that. Now, Melanie, did you want to talk this through?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And yes, it is a very important document because it sets out how we will approach our funding decisions for both the LEP and for the combined authority. So we update our assurance framework on an annual basis. And this year we've done quite extensive consultation with partners and stakeholders. So we've had over 250 engagements through a survey and various workshops to get partners' input into how we could streamline the assurance framework, but still make sure that we have that rigour. And what we've also had to incorporate this time round is to set out how we will make decisions once we have a mayor in place. So at paragraph 2.5, we've just set out the key areas where we've had an update of the framework this year. So we've swapped the exec summary into section 1. We've talked about the role of the mayor in decision making and the fact that we will become a mayoral combined authority. We've also added a statement that refers to any national statement that's issued as well and how we comply with that. We've changed references to the strategic economic plan and replaced those with the economic framework and the local industrial strategy. This time round, we've incorporated the adult education budget governance arrangements, and we've also updated the assurance process in terms of how we look at our projects in response to the feedback that we got through the consultation. So we've streamlined that and reduced the number of activities that we expect projects to go through. And then obviously we've had to set out how the framework is going to work up until May, and then where the changes are following the election of the mayor. So we've submitted a final draft to government, but we would like formal approval for the document as attached. And if we do require any last-minute changes, then we would like to delegate the authority to the Combined Authorities Managing Director in consultation with the Chair of the LEP and the Combined Authority Chair to make sure that we can approve any final amends that we're asked to do by government.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. So any questions, comments? No, I'm not seeing any. So in that case, I'm happy to recommend this. Can I see all those seconded by Councillor Swift? All those in favour, please show. Thank you very much. That is carried. Thank you, Melanie, for that. And obviously, delegation as you suggest. So moving on next is to our climate emergency ambitions, and there's some key work being done here in doing carbon impact assessment. Are we on carbon now? Is it governance next? Sorry, have I missed one?
No, it's carbon, Chair.
Excellent, fine, thank you. There's quite a lot of papers on today. Carbon impact assessment is something we tasked officers with looking at some time ago to make sure that everything we do is helping us reach our target of 2038 to have net zero carbon, and obviously making significant progress by 2030. So Ben, did you want to start this, or who's going to start?
I will, Chair, thank you. Yes, as you say, this is a fairly technical piece of work, but it's about how we are appraising our pipeline of schemes and looking at their carbon impacts and hence their carbon mitigation and offsetting. I'm going to hand over to Patrick Bowes, who's going to talk through the process that he and the team are going through.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, thank you, Ben. Yes, the paper sets out the work to date in terms of developing the approach to carbon quantification, and describes the appointment of Mott MacDonald and Ricardo as a consortium to undertake this work, and sets out the phases of the project. Phase 1 work and phase 2 work have been completed or are in train at the moment. The focus of that work has been around making recommendations to review our current approach to the assessment of carbon in business case appraisal, and to make recommendations about the potential changes we will need to make to the assurance framework, and setting out and proposing approaches to the changes that we will make. As part of that work, obviously the consultants have set out some key principles which need to be looked at in terms of the changes we need to make to the assurance framework, and these are particularly around the principles of proportionality, a consistent set of assumptions that we would apply to future appraisal of carbon in business cases, and a requirement that all projects of all types are assessed for their carbon impact. The report also sets out some of the specific findings and the particular recommendations that are being made by the consultants at these early stages in terms of the changes to the assurance framework. So, for instance, setting out more clearly at strategic assessment stages how projects will align with the carbon emissions pathway reduction and the assumptions and the objectives that are in the carbon pathways. A strategic outline business case, undertaking a structured qualitative screening of projects to ensure that they are consistent with our climate priorities, and potential changes to the outline business cases at decision points 2 and full business case around more structured and formal approaches to the quantification of carbon. And some of the recommendations that are being considered as well also look at proposing a separate presentation of carbon within the business case envelope, potentially as a 6th case, or bringing out the results much more clearly in the strategic case. Also, as well, making a commitment to undertake more sensitivity testing of the economic case elements, and also when we're testing schemes for their carbon impacts, actually using our own assumptions that are consistent with future assumptions on traffic growth and general composition of mode shift and future travel patterns. The project was reported to the investment committee on the 5th of November, and we received some very helpful comments from the investment committee, which we have built into the work. As we mentioned there, the next phases of the project concern a more detailed assessment of all of the projects in the current Transport Fund and Local Growth Fund pipeline, along with then a detailed assessment in the coming months of a smaller subset of projects and how those projects might well be mitigated, or their design might change in order to address the climate priorities. It's worth pointing out as well, we'll be bringing back to the Combined Authority at the 4th of February meeting specific recommendations from the consultants in terms of the proposed changes to the assurance framework that would result from this work. So hopefully that gives a bit of background on the work to date. It's worth mentioning as well, this project is is being developed with a steering group from all our local authority partners and colleagues in York, who are contributing to the project, and the project team are in the early stages of developing a communications plan and are working with all local authorities at the moment, and we have one-to-one sessions and briefing sessions with the local authorities and officers to bring them up to speed on the project.
Thank you.
So
very
hopefully,
much.
Chair, that gives an overview.
So this obviously important piece of work which will be coming back to us in February. Have we got any urgent questions or comments? I'm just conscious of time, and obviously people have other meetings to go to at 1 o'clock. Anybody? Yes, Councillor de Gorn?
Just a quick one on paragraph 211, which talking about next steps in phase 2 and the relation to transport. Is that being looked at in the context of the carbon emissions reduction pathway? Because you can assess the level of traffic on the current assumptions, or you could, if you assess it against the emissions pathway, that will give you a very different picture in terms of mode shift and what you're actually planning for. And the other point, I suppose, related to that is about the spatial strategy and how much you plan to reduce the need to travel in terms of longer term, local planning framework. Because obviously that's the easiest way to reduce the need to travel is actually to design your sort of planning assumptions around people being able to walk, cycle, use sustainable transport to access the facilities and employment.
Is it Patrick? Do you want to comment briefly on that?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's a very good question. Yes, yeah, the proposal is that we would undertake separate sensitivity assessments of all projects using the assumptions that are contained in the pathways work. So DFT have their own assumptions, which are used in economic cases around future traffic growth, and a range of other assumptions that are applied when they're using carbon assessment and economic case appraisal. We're obviously proposing that we will develop our own assumptions as well as a separate sensitivity test that would be based on the carbon pathways.
Thank you. Any more comments or questions? So I'm happy to present it to the next stage. We'll come back in February and obviously discuss it in a bit more detail. So I'm happy to recommend that. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much. That is carried. Moving on now then to the governance item. This is largely technical. We need to approve a few new members to the LEP, which is your team there, Roger. So great to see 2 new cultural representatives on there with Cully and who else was there? Oh, Helen as well, Helen Featherstone, and also Cameron Rashid from Bradford. So that's great to see. And obviously a bit more work to do on scrutiny. I know Councillor Harron has done quite a bit on the work on that recently. Councillor Galton, did you have a question before I ask anybody to present?
Yeah, it's a very quick one. I raised this the last time that the governance was reviewed in terms of membership of the LEP boards. I'm still concerned with the level of diversity on them. They are very male dominated. And in some of the business areas, they are very dominated by specific sectors of the economy. And I just wondered what we were hoping to do to change that.
I think the board itself is quite diverse, isn't it, Roger? I think
it's the sub-boards, Chair.
Like the panels, yeah. Okay. Roger, do you want to come back on that?
I mean, I think Councillor makes a very fair point, and we continue in our endeavours to get as much diversity across not only the LEP board. I hasten to add that we are one of the very few that meet the diversity target around gender ahead of the two-year time frame. So that's a positive, but that's no reason for being complacent. Encouraging people into the various other parts of the LEP family is a continuing requirement, and we keep pushing and asking and what have you. On the one hand, this year in particular has been challenging because of all that we've talked about before, about people being able to have free time to give and devote to all of the activities against the background that we've had. But your point's a very fair one, and I, for one, take it very seriously that we want to be as representative, but importantly, as reflective of the whole of our West Yorkshire and wider city region community in the certainly the LEP infrastructure, let alone obviously this grouping.
Lovely, thank you very much. Anything else? No? Okay, lovely. So can I see all those in favour? I'll happily recommend this, or Roger will, or somebody will. All those in favour, please show. Roger, are you putting your hand up?
Yes, I was going to recommend and show.
You recommend it as well then. Excellent. Lovely. That's carried then. So the only other thing on this agenda, which has been very long, so apologies for that, everybody, is the notes, the minutes to note at the end of the meeting, which I think we just have to note, don't we? There, minutes for information. And then we're done, aren't we, Ruth? Is there anything else you need us to do for this meeting?
We're done. That's it.
Thank you very much, everybody. With 4 minutes to spare, so thank you very much for sticking with it. And have this is the last meeting before Christmas, I believe. So have a great Christmas as far as you can within safe guidelines, and I'll see you in the new year. All the best. Goodbye.
Thanks, Bye.